Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin this work session of Division 3, House Finance Committee, and we'll open that work session at this point. For the record, I am State Representative Maureen Mooney of the town of Merrimack. I'm the Vice Chair of Division 3. Our Chairman, Representative Jess Edwards, is unable to be here today. A couple of things in advance of our presentation today. First of all, the Medicaid work session, part 2, has been scheduled. As you recall, we met last Friday on that, and there was a request, multiple requests, to have an additional session on that. So that's been scheduled for March 5th at 9 a.m. The deadline, our deadline, to make recommendations and to move forward on amendments, possible amendments to the budget, to the full Finance Committee, is the end of March, so March 26th, 27th. I just want to remind everybody that the documents we work from, the presentations that we receive, and other various handouts that we work off of that are working documents are all online in 2 locations. So the LBA page, which is off of the General Court page, and then also the Department of Administrative Services keeps track of all of that. I won't be taking any motions today, no roll calls or anything along that line, no votes today. Tomorrow morning, some weather, surprisingly enough. It's not my intention to cancel. However, if things change between now and then, I'll certainly send out a notification by email to all of you. And I would direct your attention to the General Court website, where a banner of notice of cancellations or delays due to inclement weather appears at the top. All right, just to review a little bit with members of Division 3 and the public, when we will meet, I just want to go through this. So we meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's February 27th. We meet on March 3rd at 10 a.m. We meet on March 4th at 10 a.m. We'll meet on March 5th at 9 a.m. We'll meet on March 10th at 10 a.m. March 11 at 10 a.m. March 12th at 10 a.m. Okay, if our presenters could...
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Representative Tulersky.
Thanks. Quick question. I know Representative Stringham had replied to an email thread about scheduling.
Yes.
About afternoons. So, for example, that 9 a.m., I believe it was the March 5th 9 a.m. that was scheduled. It didn't say an end time or if we were going to move into the afternoon. Do you know on those morning starts, should we assume we will be working after lunch also for scheduling purposes?
Yes, excellent question. And I'm in the same situation as you. I don't know the exact time frame. I would plan for after lunch, but I think it will be an all-day session. But perhaps Mr. White could give some clarity to that as we go along with regard to the Medicaid Part 2 section, if you have anything to contribute to timing on that.
Sure. Currently, we had scheduled tentatively, as I understood it, scheduled that until approximately 12 p.m. For that presentation. And one point of clarity, the March 12th, I currently have the Prescription Drug Affordability Board scheduled for 1 p.m. in my calendar. Is that consistent?
So I think sorry if I could interrupt.
Absolutely.
We ended up needing to schedule that for 10 a.m. because there may be a full committee public hearing that afternoon, but that has not yet been scheduled.
That was my understanding as well. In the notice I received, it was Wednesday the 12th at 10 a.m. and that is the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. That's the notice we all received. So we'll try to work on timing. Yes,
One quick
Representative
question.
Novanko?
On the weather, how early do they post that? Do you know, because some of us leave early to get here.
Right.
Do you have any idea when they, how early they post that?
I would think we'll shoot for 8 a.m. You would get an email by that time.
Yeah.
Frame.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. Our presentation today, as was duly noted and published in our calendar and outside of the room, for today, Wednesday, February 26th at 1 p.m. is a budget work session on the Division for Children, Youth, and Families. We've all been given the handout, which should be online or will be shortly. I notice, speaking of timing, Representative Tulersky, that this presentation is 33 pages long. Sort of as a scale, the one on Friday was 70 pages long, and that took us about 4.5 hours to get through. So my thought is this may be an indication as for timing, but we will see. It's my intention today to let everybody speak who wishes to speak, and any members of the public who wishes to speak after the formal presentation is certainly welcome to do so. So I would just ask that our presenters make very clear who they are and where in the budget, what page and accounting unit we're working from. That would be very helpful. Before we begin, any comments at all from members of Division 3? We are ready to start. Mr. White, when you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Noonan. I'm the director for the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families.
Good afternoon, Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer, Department of Health and Human Services. And I'd like to direct the committee to the governor's operating budget. It's page 847, and it's beginning, the DCYF budget begins with accounting unit 1896. And then we have also handed out the DCYF budget briefing book section. And just as a reminder, and that begins on page 1, it's exclusive to DCYF. And just as a reminder, the only accounting units that are included in the budget briefing book are those in excess of $1 million each state fiscal year. So there will be some accounting units that fall under that threshold that you won't necessarily see within the budget briefing book. And with that said, I will turn the presentation over to Marie.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to begin on page 2, on slide 2 of the presentation. And you can see there the DCYF mission, which is to partner with families and communities to provide resources and supports that lead to the safety and healthy development of children, youth, and the communities in which they live. Moving on to slide 3, this is an overview of DCYF's primary mandates. You'll see the first mandate is Child Protective Services, which is RSA 169C. And through our Child Protective Services, we investigate and assess allegations of child abuse and neglect, and provide for the safety, permanency, and well-being of children who are victims of abuse and or neglect, or children at risk of maltreatment. DCYF also oversees juvenile justice services, which are 2 RSAs, 169B for delinquent and RSA 169D for CHINs, or children in need of services. And through our JJS services, we support children and youth to remediate challenges with delinquency, to promote child, family, and community safety, and support children and youth identified as children in need of services. DCYF also oversees the Sununu Youth Services Center through RSA 621. And through this work, we provide a safe and secure environment for detained and committed youth who receive crisis intervention, mental health services, treatment services in a secure setting. We ensure the safety and well-being of committed and detained youth and overall safety of the community. Slide 4 provides an overview of DCYF's bureaus and program areas. In addition to the director and deputy director, there are 7 bureau chiefs who oversee a discrete set of responsibilities, and this team works collaboratively across the table to meet our agency responsibilities. Page 5 walks through some of our key accomplishments and highlights. You'll see in the top rectangle regarding DCYF workforce, vacancies in assessment caseworkers, and those are our caseworkers that complete investigations of abuse and neglect. We've seen a decrease from 9% to 4% when we compare December of 2023 to December of 2024, so in the past year. Similarly, vacancies in our juvenile justice officers has decreased from 4% to 0 when we compare December of 2023 to December of 2024. Vacancies in our youth counselor positions, which are the positions that are youth-facing at our Sununu Youth Services Center, have decreased from 56% in December of 2022 to 21% in December of 2023 and to 13% in December of 2024. So we've seen significant decreases in the vacancy rate of our youth counselors.
Ms. Noonan, would you mind questions
Very quick.
in between your
Absolutely.
presentation?
Be happy to.
Okay, Representative Telersky for a question.
Thank you. Very quickly, I'm pleased to see that the vacancy rate has dropped significantly. Can you give us your view on what was the most important factor there?
Fortunately, there has been some raises built in from the legislature, which has been supportive of our staff and our client-facing positions. So that's been a positive movement. Additionally, we made some changes to the way that our child protection positions and our youth counselor positions are posted, working with the state to post them in what we call a mass recruitment fashion. So it eliminates the need for a potential applicant to apply for various position numbers for the same position and allows a ghost position number, a phantom number to be posted online, and for hiring managers to be able to peruse the array of available position numbers and hire into what's available rather than asking applicants to repeatedly apply by position number, which was a strain for applicants. So those are a couple of areas. Additionally, at SYSC, we have fine-tuned our programming. We're putting forth a trauma-informed model. We have some new administration. We have a fairly new director, a new deputy director position. Some positions really aligned toward making sure that we've got programming there, clinical supports in place. We've got additional clinical staff. So the programming and stability at SYSC has really allowed for the youth counselor position to be more stable and to minimize or maximize retention. You're welcome.
And in addition to that, just providing more of a budgetary perspective on that, for the biennium ending June 30th, 2023, we did have a personnel back of the budget cut in excess of $22 million. And prior to that, the state was under a hiring freeze during the initial phases of the pandemic. In the current biennium, the back of the budget cut was more broad in the sense that we could satisfy that reduction through any other class line that didn't have a restriction on it. So that globally as a department, that opened up our ability to hire for those positions because we weren't, in addition to the many strategies that Marie described, we weren't unfunding specific positions and had no opportunity to hire for them.
Representative Nelvanko for a question.
Yeah, very, very quick question. These are all full-time positions that we're talking about here?
That's correct.
And any part-time positions or anything that's contracted out?
We do have some part-time positions at SYSC for the youth counselor position. Those are harder to recruit for. We've had some interest and wanted to have them available so that we had the best array of candidates and positions and options available, but it is a bit harder to recruit for the part-time positions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Moving down to the second rectangle, serving children and families earlier. So this is really a hallmark of the work that DCYF is working toward, is moving toward. As I talk about our agency priorities over the next 2 years, we're really shining a light on serving families at their earliest time of need. And a couple of highlights in this area to date. In the first bullet is our Community Navigator program at our central intake, which is our hotline. So if a reporter, someone with a concern for a child, calls our central intake, there's a community navigator available so that if the call of concern will not result in an open investigation with DCYF, there is somebody that can reach out to the family or to the reporter to provide resources. So this is an early effort to connect families that may have needs, but for which any concern for abuse neglect has not come to that full level. They can still receive some resources, information to be able to meet their family needs before needing to come to DCYF's attention. So we've seen some increase in referrals, and we've had 807 referrals since August of 2023. So that's a significant amount of families receiving a touch point outside of the DCYF system. In the second bullet, community-based voluntary services. This is also a service with case management that happens outside of DCYF. With community-based voluntary services, these families have had an investigation for child abuse or neglect. At the conclusion or throughout the investigation, we conduct a risk assessment. And for families that come in at moderate, high, or very high need, we can offer them a community-based voluntary service where we have a couple of community providers who, depending on the area of the state the family is from, will provide case management, can provide for services, can ensure that they're going out, meeting with families, again, trying to eliminate the potential of another call to DCYF central intake when there's been no abuse or neglect determined. The third bullet down is our juvenile justice transformation. Through our juvenile justice transformation, we've developed an assessment process where law enforcement, prior to filing a delinquency petition regarding a youth, will first call our central intake, our hotline, and request a juvenile justice assessment. And we have some juvenile probation and parole officers whose responsibility it is to meet with youth and families, assess whether the youth's needs can be met in the community, and thus diverting them from the juvenile justice system from coming into this deep end of the system through diversion programs, other community resources. So our juvenile justice transformation effort has been very successful. We've seen a 30% reduction in juvenile probations from calendar year 2019 to calendar year 2023. Moving to the third rectangle.
Representative Daniels for a question.
Sure, thank
Before
you.
you go on the intake, if someone was suspected that there may be child abuse or that there might be in the future, is that something that they would call intake on? And let me give you a specific thing.
Sure.
My school board recently passed a policy that says that a teacher could withhold information from a parent if they suspected that sharing that information with the parent might cause abuse of the child. Is that something that would be handled, and how does the department handle that, or don't they get involved in it?
If anyone in the state of New Hampshire, everyone is a mandated reporter, every citizen. So if anyone suspects that a child is being abused, neglected, they're mandated to call DCYF Central Intake. Our hotline will process those reports. If there's a belief that by informing a parent or caregiver that the child could be in danger, that could be a reason not to first talk with the parents. But in the majority of cases, we are hopeful that educators are working with families, talking with parents about observations they're making regarding their children, because there could be opportunities to help support families before abuse and neglect happens. So we certainly encourage that collaboration between educators and the children that they serve.
Do those get reported to the department if it's suspected? If Mrs. Smith, a teacher, thinks that she doesn't want to share information because she suspects that it might happen, is that something that would be reported to the department?
Yes, if they are concerned that there's abuse, neglect happening, could be happening, any suspicion whatsoever, they should be calling Central Intake.
Okay, and I'm just trying to separate
Sure.
from the second part that it has happened versus I think it might.
Sure. It would be challenging for a teacher to be able to assert whether or not abuse or neglect has happened in every instance. So any suspicion should be called in so that DCYF can assess that and make that determination.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about I think it might happen, not that it has happened. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Representative Priest for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Back to your juvenile justice transformation and assessment. Do you have any numbers for calendar year 2024?
I do. If you turn to slide 17. On slide 17, there's juvenile justice data. The pink line in particular shows the juvenile justice assessment. The count of youth is on the left axis. So the count of youth served through the juvenile justice assessment is included on this depiction.
So are we continuing to see a reduction?
So what we're
In the
seeing on
cases.
this slide, on slide 17, the gold line, the yellowish line, is the count of youth served in home in juvenile justice.
Right.
The blue line is residential. So what I'm seeing here, what we're seeing at DCYF is a reduction, slow but steady reduction in our in-home juvenile justice cases. While the residential treatment has declined a bit, it's staying fairly steady. So what this says to me is that those youth that can be diverted through and have a JJ assessment are most likely the youth that could have been served in home, but were able to decrease even the in-home served families. And that certainly saves time for court, law enforcement personnel, juvenile justice system overall. So we are seeing an impact in the data.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Moving to the third rectangle on slide 5, kinship care. Kinship care is something we're really proud of. I do have a data slide in the subsequent pages as well. But what we're seeing currently is that the initial out-of-home placement with kin is happening 74% of the time, and that's up 45% in this state fiscal year. So what this means is that when a child needs to come into out-of-home care because it's no longer safe in their family of origin, we first want to place in kinship care, which means it's someone known to the child. It's a relative, it's a coach, it's someone that has a relationship with a child. You may be familiar, the legislature supported us in passing a new kinship law, so that's been very successful for us and for families. So we're seeing kinship care currently surpassing kids in out-of-home foster care, which is a win for kids, a win for families. So that's a really important accomplishment. The second bullet in kinship is that children served in kinship care, again, surpass those served in foster care. And what we're seeing in the early data is that children placed in kinship care seem to be more likely to reunify with their birth families. So that's important. That's that relationship between the kinship and the home of origin, that the parents working collaboratively, and reunification is looking like it happens more frequently, more often when children are first in kinship care.
Representative Wallner for a question.
What kind of resources are kinship placements provided? I mean, do they receive a foster placement payment, just like a foster family would? What kinds of
Yes.
things do we do for them?
Yep. So we are processing a rule and an ability to be able to pay foster kinship families the same stipend as a foster care parent once they're licensed. So that's equal. We also can provide the same kinds of services. So if the child and family could benefit from an in-home service to support any challenging symptoms that the child is exhibiting, any needs that the caregivers have to provide for the child in their home, those same array of in-home services are available as they are for foster families.
Can I have a follow-up? I think I heard you say that when they are eligible to be licensed, so the kinship family goes through licensing just like a foster family?
Yes, there's some slight differences in the licensing, but there's a license, and that was legislatively put through recently, and so it does allow those families to have a license. It's a bit of a different license than the foster families, but then allows for that stipend as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Nalvanko, followed by Representative Priest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question, not a lot of detail, but the front end process of what's the time frame involved for identifying kinship alternatives and then the licensing process? What does the timeline on that look like?
Things move very quickly at DCYF. So when we determine that a child is in danger and needs to be removed from their home, we're immediately talking with caregivers, with the child, trying to identify important people in a child's life. It's certainly our preference to place with kin over foster care. So we're working immediately, even before oftentimes danger is identified, to try to talk with families about if your child couldn't be with you, who are the important people in your child's life. So we do some of that proactive planning in our investigative process. And then the timeline for licensing, it can be very quickly. We have the ability to do some initial steps around safety, some background checks, some police checks, some things that will happen very quickly so that in a matter of days, we could be providing payment to that foster family while they continue to go through the rest of the process.
And a very quick follow-up on, I think, Representative Wallner's question. So the difference, is it exactly the same funding for
Yes.
kinship as it is for
Yes, it is.
foster?
Yes.
Thank you.
Representative Priest for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With all of these key accomplishments, do you have, or has it been done, any dollar assessment of the money that has been saved to the agency because of these new programs? Like, for instance, transitioning the children to kin care versus foster care.
So in that example, we're still paying families to be able to provide for that care.
The same amount?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think what we're hoping to see over time is a transition. As I go through our strategic priorities, you'll see a focus on trying to reduce reliance on residential treatment. So we believe once we can do some of that we will see that we can transition funds into more community-based services. What's hard to predict is the intensity of children's needs. So we know that coming, in a post-COVID world, that we're seeing youth with higher mental health needs and just greater acuity. And so we've not reached that tipping point yet where we're able to see that reduction in residential treatment. But we do believe over time that it's possible that we can repurpose those funds into community-based care. The final rectangular box on slide 5 is just additional support for transition-aged youth. And so we have our HOPE program, which stands for Housing and Opportunities to Personally Excel. And through this service, we're seeing that voluntary foster care to 21 is available for kids who were in our state custody at age 18 and who volunteer to extend care. We've provided that to 130. We have a service called Youth Villages LifeSet, which is life skills education and training. And we provided that opportunity to 205 youth in state fiscal year 2024, which was up from state fiscal year 2023. And then we've continued our partnerships with housing authorities for fostering youth independence housing vouchers. And through this effort, we partner with local and state agencies, and we connect young adults under age 24 to vouchers so that they can obtain housing vouchers.
Representative Nalvanko for a question.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So what are the overall demographics of the populations you serve look like? How does, if you have any information on that?
So we serve children we can serve children through our child protection and juvenile justice, typically 0 through 18. And there are opportunities to extend, as I just shared for that HOPE program, we have extended foster care. So for youth who would like some additional assistance launching into adulthood, who were involved in our system at age 18, we can continue to do that up to age 23. We have some services and community resources available through age 26. So we certainly want to stick by youth to make sure that we can launch them into adulthood, into independent adults. And certainly we serve families, adults all across the state who are parents to their children.
Just a quick follow-up, and I was talking about, I think more trying to get a feel for, so the split between the youth that you're serving, so in those various categories, it concentrated on the front end, concentrated on the higher end of the scale, and then more importantly, the split between male, female, in the demographics.
I don't have the demographics with me today regarding male and female youth that we serve.
Your sense of things that it's skewed one way or the other?
No, I don't think I could answer that. I think perhaps our juvenile justice population and at our secure treatment facility is probably 2/3 male, 1/3 female. But for our child protection, I would say it's probably close to 50-50.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Moving on to slide 6, this is where I have outlined our DCYF strategic priorities. And it's really important that I let you know the work that we're doing looking into the future, the improvements that we want to see in our DCYF system. So within the center of the slide, you'll see a circle. And in that circle, and it's color coordinated, but those are our 4 strategic priorities for 2025 and 2026. And they're focused on our case practice, building our new secure treatment facility, developing our new electronic case management system, and focused on ensuring we have a robust service array. In particular, I also want to talk about the squares on the outside of the circle. So following the practice, the navy color. So we have some strategies in place, activities in place to focus on fine-tuning our case practice. And through those efforts, we believe we'll reduce the percentage of youth in residential treatment, and then subsequently will increase the percentage of foster youth who live in family settings, kinship, relative, and foster family homes. Following around the circle to the right, our new secure treatment facility will be open by December of 2026. All employees will be trained in our trauma-informed care, and the census will not exceed 12 youth at any point in time. Moving down to our electronic case management system. This new system, it will be called Granite Families.
We do have a question.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
so
Noonan.
sorry.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Is this flow okay for you?
Absolutely.
All
Please
right.
stop me. Thank you.
Representative Talarsky for a question.
Yes.
Just a quick question on that statement that the census will never exceed 12 youth. How can you guarantee that, or what's your plan to make sure that
Sure.
that's the case?
There's a lot of work to be done to ensure that. We know our legislative mandate is not to exceed 12. Our juvenile justice transformation effort has gone a long way to show us that there is currently a reduction in use of SYSC. And we have a group that's come together involving a variety of community resources, law enforcement, courts, folks from DCYF, from Children's Behavioral Health, from the Parole Board. We have prosecutors, we have defense counsel present. So we know that this is going to take a community effort to figure out what else is available for youth, in particular detained youth. And even a subset of detained youth are the subset of youth who are detained after hours during the night. What else can we create that's available for cool-off periods? It could be that something happened in the family home, but perhaps with a little planning, with the right service, with the right kind of foster home, we could eliminate the need for after-hours youth being detained at SYSC. So we have some areas of focus, but it will certainly take a collaborative effort. In the purple, our electronic case management system will be called Granite Families, and we intend to have that live by December of 26th. It will replace our 1997 case management system called Bridges, which is certainly not an up-to-date technological option for us. And so we anticipate lots of new efficiencies and are excited to have a new system that will help our caseworkers have a place to document the work they do with families in an efficient way so that they can spend more time with kids and families. Moving to the final area, which is the green section, which is our service array. We hope to see an increase of children served in their own homes and increase foster home availability for children. In particular, we have a goal around the 14 to 17-year-old population, which is that same population that's mostly at SYSC, that same population that might be overrepresented in residential treatment. So we want to make sure that we have a robust array of foster family homes, and we're still focused on kinship care, but for that 14 to 17-year-old population.
Ms. Noonan, how are we doing in terms of foster families? Are we at 100%? Are we at 90%, if you had to guess, in terms of availability of those who are trained and ready to go as foster families? Where are we?
So foster family availability is a difficult question. So we certainly have, we've got almost 500 foster homes across the state who are available with more beds than that number of homes. What's challenging about foster care is that there has to be a match between the skills and capacity of the family and the unique needs of the child. So it isn't a one-for-one. So we can't take any child in out-of-home care and say, that's one child, there's one bed here, let's make that connection. It has to be a family that's comfortable, that feels skilled, that feels confident and competent in their capacity to serve whatever needs come with the youth. So I don't know that I would ever say we're at 100% capacity of our foster care availability. Certainly we're recruiting. We have a fabulous employee who is fairly new to DCYF and is doing a great job in recruitment. We also want to make sure we're doing a good job in retaining foster family and caregivers by supporting them, by giving them the right services, by meeting with them, hearing them, making sure they're a partner at the table. That's actually a goal in our priorities. So do we have availability? Yes. Is it always a apples to apples fit for the needs of particular children and youth? No. And so we always are going to need to keep recruiting. We've got large sibling groups. Some people want to take smaller children. We've got teenagers available. Some people want a sibling group of 2. We've got sibling groups of 4, right? So it has to be the right match. So I don't know that we would ever be at 100% capacity.
Thank you for the detailed question. Representative Nelvanko.
Yes, thank you, Madam
Detailed
Chair.
answer. Representative Nelvanko.
Very quick question. How often do you find mismatches in that program where you match somebody with a foster, foster or kinship, either way? What kind of a mismatch rate do you have, and how do you address those?
I don't know that I have a percentage for you, but certainly we have kids disrupt from foster family and kinship settings. We try to look at those and make sure we think of it, from a quality assurance aspect in terms of, did we provide the right service? Are there different services available that might have maintained that child and youth? What are we learning about that youth? Sometimes youth come into care and we think we understand the youth's needs. And as kids get comfortable, either we see symptoms exacerbate, sometimes we see them stabilize. So it's always an opportunity to better understand what a child's needs is, and also to provide training to foster care parents. So disruptions certainly happen, and we always hope that we learn from them and try to minimize that and know exactly what the child would need in the next home.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Wallner for a question.
Thank you. I've been sort of looking ahead in the
Sure.
presentation to see if there was any mention of adoption. And can you remind us of what the guidelines are around when a child ends up in a situation where they're terminated, their family is terminated?
Sure. Yep. So for each child that comes into out-of-home care, have legislative requirements that we have 12 months to work with the family of origin to try to rectify and remediate the concerns that brought the child to our attention. So there are continual court hearing reviews. We're continuing to work a case plan with the family. We're meeting with the child, the family, any service providers. We're involved in treatment meetings, IEP and educational meetings. So our case managers, our caseworkers are constantly working with families over the course of that 12 months. When a child first comes into out-of-home care, reunification is the primary goal. We're also obligated to identify a concurrent goal. So sometimes that's adoption, depending on the needs, what we know about the family, how the age of the child, what we can anticipate might happen. Most often, adoption is the concurrent goal because that's the most permanent other option available after reunification. And so over the course of that 12 months, we're working both primary and concurrent goals with the court's oversight. When we get to about 9 months into the course of a case, we'll start to really think about, does it look like permanency is imminent over the next 3 months? Should we be doing more around the concurrent goal? And then at the 12-month mark, there's a specific court hearing called a permanency hearing. And at that time, we're obligated to recommend to the court that we adopt an alternative permanency goal and then work toward that goal. And at that point, it could be termination of parental rights as recommended, and then we would be moving toward adoption.
Do you have a statistic of how many children in the past year have gone into adoption?
I don't have that on the top of my head. I can get that for you. Certainly more children reunify than go to adoption, but I can get that for you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to slide 7. This is a visual of what we anticipate or where our goal will be as a result of the priorities that I talked about in the prior slide. And so you'll see here that our overarching goal is to serve families with the lightest touch possible. And if we start at the bottom circle, which starts with central intake, I talked about that community navigator program that's available. So we hope that we're able to stop a family's I don't know if I should pause. That's okay. I just wanted to pause. I wasn't sure. You'll see if a family comes to our attention at central intake, we hope that that's the only involvement they have with our agency. We're giving out referrals, we're giving out information. We can refer the reporter or the family to the community navigator program. So then you'll see that stop sign. We hope to stop a family there. If the information requires us to do an investigation or an assessment, we can serve a family with paid services right through our investigative process. And we hope that the family will stop there. At the conclusion of our assessment, I talked about those community-based voluntary services with outside case managers. If that can be done, again, that could stop the family from coming any more deeply into our system than necessary. Moving up to the third circle, if we do need to open a case, if we can substantiate and need to substantiate abuse and neglect, we hope to serve that family in home with that lightest touch possible, keeping the family intact, providing those community-based services to keep them together. If we have to have out-of-home care, moving up to the second to the last circle, we want to use kinship or foster care options, that community-based care to keep kids as close to home as possible in community home settings. If that can't be possible, that outer circle, which is the deepest end of our system, is residential treatment. And you'll see those arrows on the left, those navy arrows. If we're using residential, that should be a short-term episode of treatment. We want to step kids back down to kinship or foster care, and then step them back down to their own homes where we can maintain that family intact. So this just serves as a visual to outline for you our goal to serve families with that lightest touch possible.
Question.
Representative Talerski for a question.
So knowing that the time in residential care the goal is very, very short, what is your average stay then for children?
I don't have that today, but I can certainly get that for you. Today, I would say it would be longer than we would want it to be. And so that's why these are goals, making sure we're assessing, engaging families, we're talking with them at the table, we're understanding families' strengths and needs so that we can build off those strengths, work through those needs, and get kids moving through our system more quickly. But I can get that for you.
Quick follow-up. Would you say that it's days, weeks, or months?
I would say for the majority of kids, it's months.
Thank you.
The thing I'll say about residential treatment too is that we know that that will always be a necessary part of our service array continuum. Those episodes of treatment for those high acuity youth that I talked about that we're seeing in a post-COVID world. So we anticipate there'll be a continued need for residential treatment, but we want it to be treatment oriented, as short term as possible, and that we're stepping kids back through our system when we can.
Representative Stringham for a question.
Yeah, so would you say then people enter residential treatment and then they graduate out of it back to non-supported, non-observed? Or once they're in it, are they kind of in it?
So that would be our goal, is to make sure that we're stepping kids back through, closing cases, reunifying families. There are some situations where youth have challenging symptoms. We have some kids who have disabilities and will require long-term care. We often work across the department with our long-term supports and services. For some kids that might need adult care. So there is a varying.
I think I kind of asked it backwards. I'm kind of meant, once you're in home treatment and you're finished with that, then the case is closed and
Absolutely.
you're no longer, you don't pick up the phone unless they call.
That's
type of
correct.
things.
Yep, we close out cases every day and connect families with local community-based services and hope that they'll live successful, independent lives outside of DCYF.
Representative Seaworth for a question.
Thank you very much. Given that you have this goal represented with the circles here to keep family and children in the center, by what methodology can you measure your success towards that goal?
So we have full metrics. I don't think I can provide to you. We have a full metrics outlining all of our activities around our strategic priorities with data points. For example, residential treatment, we hope that we'll see a reduction by 10%. Similarly, we hope to see a 10% increase in the number of families served in home. We have percentages around numbers of foster home availability for 14 to 17-year-olds. So we have a whole array of metrics that we'll use to measure our success or our challenges, and we'll need to pivot and change up our strategy and figure out how to meet that.
Representative Daniels for a question.
Thank you. After assessment, you need to take further treatment like in home or foster care. How long are those records kept if you're able to close a case?
I want to get back to you. I think perhaps it could, if we had a finding and we opened a case, I believe the records are currently kept indefinitely.
And if it's unfounded,
If it's unfounded, it is 4 years.
it's 4 years. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to correct myself. If it's screened out, it's retained for 4 years. And I think I will get back to you around if it's unfounded. Let me get back to you on that so that I'm confident in the response.
Can you define what screened out means?
Yes, it means a call that comes to our hotline, but is determined it did not meet criteria for an investigation.
Okay, so you hold that for 4 years.
That's correct.
But if you go through a case that's unfounded, then that's when you're going to get back to me.
I'm going to get back to you if it's unfounded. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to slide 8. This is our first bureau that we'll review. It's our Bureau of Field Services. And this is the bureau that most people think of when they think of DCYF. It's our caseworkers, it's our central intake hotline, it's our child protective services, and it's our juvenile justice services. On slide 9, you'll see that we're going to move into the accounting unit. And we're on page 847 of the governor's budget at this point. And accounting unit 1896, our DCYF emergency funds. We use these for unexpected costs for families, things that are outside of our service array. So it could be things like a car repair or a bill that needs to be paid in order to allow the family to stay intact. So it's not a service provider coming in, but it's an unexpected cost that is unable to be paid otherwise in another part of the community or the system, but enables a family to stay together by being able to pay that. Moving into accounting unit 2957. This is our child protective workers. So we've got almost 300 caseworkers across the state. Our child protection staff are mobile, they're field-based. They're meeting with families, they're meeting with treatment providers, education meetings, court hearings, so there's significant amounts of travel. We're available 24/7 on call to respond to imminent danger of children. We've got our overtime line there, supporting children and youth 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It looks as though on page 849, where that accounting unit is described, that there is a reduction of the number of positions, 30 or so. That's fairly substantial. Any expansion you want to make on that?
Sure. 29 of those positions were moved to accounting unit 3443, and 2 positions were moved to accounting unit 2956. And we'll be going through that where we can talk about the changes when we arrive at that accounting unit, if that works. But those positions and the personnel costs were moved through there, so there was no positions abolished during this phase of the budget.
Representative Wallner for a question.
Okay, get this closer. There we go. You skipped over page 848, the director's office, and I see that the personnel line is down considerably, and the positions are also down.
So we will get to the office of the director in another slide, but we did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We did again move positions to a different accounting unit, so there was no reduction there.
Okay, there's no reduction. Just
I'm going to move to accounting unit 2958, which is on page 850.
Madam Chair.
Representative Novanko for a question.
Thank you. If I look on 849 or line 102 where it has contracts for program services, is that another case of where the money's been shifted someplace else?
Yes, those dollars have also been moved to 3443.
Thank you.
I'm moving to page 850, which is accounting unit 2958. We're still on slide 9. And you'll see in this accounting unit, starting in class line 636 and moving down, this is the majority of our funding for our out-of-home care. So our foster care placement, broken out by eligibility, needs and requirements for children, how those are paid, our adoption subsidies for children who have been adopted, our residential treatment dollars. So in this accounting unit is where you see our placement costs. And of course, as I mentioned, having foster care placement is an incredibly important service array component that we have in our robust array, as is residential treatment. And while we hope to minimize that, we know that there'll always be a need for that kind of level of care.
Representative Wallner for a question.
well, on 636 and 637, it seems like there is a pretty big increase on line 637 from the last biennium. And I wondered, 639.
So that's on page 850 of the governor's budget.
Yes.
Sure. So there's a couple of things. Well, can I just provide sort of a broader context here? So this is certainly a unique accounting unit when comparing it to many of the accounting units we've discussed and seen so far. We break out each type of service here where we break it down by Title 4E or Title 4A TANF for state general funds so that we can more accurately track the types of expenses that are allowable. And I think what is also unique about this is one of the things that we're trying to do in the budget is look at the costs we've incurred and look at the costs that we're going to incur. But those costs are driven by the unique needs of the child. So if a child qualifies for 4E or they qualify for TANF, or it's 100% general funds, we can't necessarily predict what the future needs of those children are going to be. So one thing that you will see in the regular department-wide transfer, 3 times a year, we bring forward an item to the fiscal committee where we often move funds within this accounting unit to adjust for those changes throughout the year. So we start with an initial assumption based on experience that we've seen in the past, and then we make adjustments. So I just kind of want to put a little sort of asterisk on this conversation. But Representative Wallner, to answer your question directly, we did have a prioritized need that was funded in the governor's phase relative to enhanced foster care rates, and I can go back and verify, but I believe we are seeing a portion of that show up here. And then we also saw, if you look at state fiscal year 26, we also found that the experience in state fiscal year 26 was almost approximately what we had budgeted. So I think there's anticipation, as Marie was discussing earlier, about us trying to kind of move down that large circle towards the less restrictive. We're hoping and anticipating higher utilization here versus residential in the long run.
I think you just answered my next question, but does this budget include any rate increases for foster families?
Sure. So we submitted 2 prioritized needs requests. One was an enhanced foster care rate, and that was included. And then we also included a prioritized need request for increased foster care rates, more standard rates. In the first year of the biennium, the enhanced foster care rates was almost $700,000 total. And it was the same in the second year. The increased foster care rates prioritized need that was not funded was just shy of $1 million in each state fiscal year.
Representative Priest for a question, followed by Representative Tulersky.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On page 850, toward the bottom, you have estimated source of funds for Child and Family Services. Could you give an explanation on the agency income and why there is no agency income for 2026 and 2027?
Sure. I think I need to look further into that and get back to you just to give you a full response. But I'll see if I can do that actively as we're sitting here today.
And as a follow-up on the Educational Trust Fund, I mean, it was my understanding that those funds are supposed to be used for educational purposes. And you have like 3 million in each year. Can you explain that?
Yes. Yes. So there was a bill that was passed during the state fiscal year 2024 legislative session, Senate Bill 463. Senate Bill 463 made a $3 million appropriation for state fiscal year 25 in the amount of $3 million directed from the Education Trust Fund. When the agency prepared its budget, we continued this practice as it was originally envisioned and passed by the legislature. And I would defer to the committee whether there's a policy change in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Telersky, followed by Representative Nelvanko.
Before I get to my first question, do you know what the policy was for Senate Bill 463?
Oh. Actually, I believe I misspoke. I believe it was HB 1588. Hang on one second. Let me just verify that.
So this one was to increase the age from 21 to 22 for kids in DCYF care.
Yep.
If they have special education services.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, and then my original question was somewhat unrelated, but talking about this population of children when it comes to their medical care. Do they all get enrolled in Medicaid regardless of what their family situation is, or how is that handled?
Sure. So typically, the most children typically qualify for Medicaid that come in, and I have an individual here who's told me in the past typically what they do is sign them up initially because most of the time they will be qualifying for Medicaid. Unless and then they go through the process to verify that, and then if they don't, then they don't. But a vast majority, many of the children do.
Okay, so you're using family income. So is there a chance that with our discussion on Friday about premiums that we may have children affected as they enter into your care with the increased premiums or the establishment of premiums for some families?
I think I'd need to look into the answer for that. The state is paying for these children as they come into our care. So I think I'd need to consult with a couple of different people to understand what the implications would be there.
Okay, but just to clarify though, when you talk about if they're eligible, you're using the parents or the guardian's income to see if they're eligible? No, I'm seeing Trish Tilley saying no. What
What are you using?
Sure. So they would be an out-of-home placement, so the parent's income wouldn't apply at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Wallner. Actually, I'm sorry, Representative Nelvanko, followed by Representative Wallner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a question on, it looks to me on the agency income that there's a pretty significant shift between what part of it comes from federal funds and what portion is coming from the general fund. Is there some explanation for what's happening there?
As far as an increase in general funds?
Well, so I'm looking at the federal funds going from, in fiscal year 25 adjusted from 19 to 2022 on the federal, and the general fund from 43 to 53. So I'm looking at a disproportionate shift in the proportion of funding coming from the federal versus the state general funds.
Sure. So the experience that we've had in this biennium was that we've had to move almost $10 million of general funds into this account. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but the experience that we've had is that we have had fewer scenarios where we've been able to leverage other federal funding sources, and we've seen a higher utilization of 100% general funds. And again, that's based on the unique circumstances of the child. And so when we prepared our agency budget, what we were trying to do is look at what the experience has been, look at how the costs have been incurred, and look at what federal sources we've been able to leverage. And for better or for worse, we've seen an increase in general fund utilization. And what we've tried to do here is reflect that.
So just a quick follow-up. So, so you're saying, so for the previous biennium, well, from 23, or 22, 23, the trend line would look pretty dramatic in that respect? It just looks like a pretty big shift on the assumption and, you know, versus,
Sure. So let me see here. I can follow up with additional analyses and details to kind of give a more thorough explanation on that if that would work for the committee.
yeah, I think that's right, because I'm interested to know whether there's a, you know, something that has to do with the federal funding changing, or what exactly accounts for the,
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we talked about last on Friday evening was where we have a loss of federal revenue because the residential contracts are budgeted in 3 different locations. They're budgeted in the 7948 account within Medicaid. They're budgeted within 2958, as well as another account within the Division for Behavioral Health. And we had talked about the loss of federal Medicaid dollars in certain instances relative to qualified residential treatment facilities and institutions for mental disease, where essentially if it's over 16 beds, we are not able to claim Medicaid dollars for certain services there. And so because these contracts, collectively, there's 15 of them, they exceed $100 million annually because they cross the 3 different accounting units. I think it's difficult to look at one accounting unit in isolation. So I think what may be best is if we work on providing the committee an analysis that shows the dollars across all 3 accounts and how they tie out. That will probably get to your question a little more clearly than an isolated conversation about one accounting unit where a contract shares three.
yeah, I just a very quick follow-up to that. We had, I forget which presentation it was, we were talking about doing a better job of making sure that we were recovering everything that was available to us from the federal level. And it sounds to me like the fact that we're dealing with, you know, 3 different accounting units on this creates the opportunity for not fully recovering.
The accounting structure is fairly unrelated to whether we claim the dollars or not. That happens at a much more detailed level. I mean, this is the state budget. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes here. So because our contracts are shared across multiple division areas, we try to account for those dollars in multiple division areas. But I think that makes your job difficult when you're trying to understand why this particular line is changing when you don't have insider vision into the other accounting units that are located 100 pages away in the budget.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the
Sure.
some structure that makes that easier to understand what's going on there. Thank you.
Representative Waldner and then Representative Stringham.
So in the lines, can you tell me what is included in the lines of, on this page? Where are the residential placements? The not kinship or not foster family, but the residential. Are
Sure.
they in here?
Yeah, so 643 and 644 are 2 locations, but what I can do with that analysis is I can show you each accounting unit in each class line that are factored into the residential contracts, so that you'll be able to see that in a more detailed manner if that's helpful.
Just, yes, that would be helpful. And maybe a breakdown of how many children are in each of those. kinship, foster, and residential? I mean, that probably is in your slide deck someplace, I'm sure. I've already missed it. I have one other question. Last year, I brought in a bill pertaining to children who are in foster care who have Social Security. And we were told that the state takes the Social Security payment when the child enters care. Where would I find that income in the budget?
I believe that's the agency income, but that's where I want to go back and just verify that.
Okay, and I see that you're projecting none for this coming biennium.
That's where I need to go back and have a conversation to understand why that looks like that.
Okay. One other about House Bill 661. There was a report that we're going to hopefully see in this committee and talk about. But in the report, they refer to the state of New Hampshire being able to maybe claim more 4E funds. And I wonder if there's been any, if the department has looked into that and whether we're pursuing that.
Thank you. Yes, we are pursuing that. We have an active group of departmental employees. It's a complicated if this, then that, if this, then that sort of flow chart that is required with the QRTPs that Nathan described, the residential treatment programs. With the Families First Prevention and Services Act in 2018, the QRTP was established, the IMD, Institute of Mental Diseases, were established, again, where Nathan referenced homes that have more than 16 youth. But part of that also outlined a specific flow chart of things that all needed to be lined up in order to draw down the 4E funding. And I wish it were as simple as if we just do this one thing, but right from contemplating residential care and children need a comprehensive assessment of treatment. Did it happen in this time frame, in this way? What was the outcome of that? You know, moving right into, do we have the right court order with the right date within the right time frame? Do we have the right documentation at the right time? So there's a complicated flow that we are actively working through in order to ensure that we can draw down those funds.
Great. Thank you.
Representative Stringham for question.
Yeah, you had mentioned the 10 million in general funds. Was that the entire Division 42, or was that just this particular department number?
Sure. So it was just shy of 10 million for this particular accounting unit. We also had to move about $3.5 million to the SYSC budget as well.
Is there one place where the entire 42 division sums and breakout is in the book? I'm missing it somehow.
Yes, on page 865 of the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving to slide 10. This is the part of the Bureau of Field Services, which is focused on juvenile justice rather than child protection. And I'm on page 861, accounting unit 7905. So in this accounting unit, we see the field staff for juvenile justice, and we see that we have 107 staff. We actually have 0 vacancies. Oh, I see a question.
Sorry, Representative Nalavenko. I'm trying to get my head around the increases in the budget. So this is now in a COVID, post-COVID, and if I'm looking at the page where we talked about all the accomplishments and the progress we're making in the various areas with the circles and everything else. And I think when we looked at page 17 where we showed the trend lines, so it looks to me like the trends are down to stable. and yet some of the budget numbers are increasing. So just some explanation to help me get my head around what's going on with the trends and the progress we're making on the key accomplishment areas, and the fact that the budgetary side of it is doesn't seem to totally reflect that.
Sure. So I think what's important to start with is, as I've already mentioned, we've had to move quite a bit of money into the budget and make adjustments. And when we talk about the Sununu Youth Services Center, the budget that we had to work with was based off of a budget that was set to close. HB 49 of the 2023 legislative session was an expedited bill that prevented the closure. I believe it was in March of 2023. And so when we entered the House phase in the last budget, that particular accounting unit was based on a closed amount. And then we actually saw $1 million reduction during the House phase. So it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at the current budgeted amounts, because it doesn't express the specific need. And so what we've tried to do, both with the changes in the QRTP IMD issue, as well as what we've seen and experienced relative to the needs within the Sununu Youth Services Center, is make those adjustments. We also, one important thing to understand about the DCYF budget, it is heavily personnel, and there was, the 10% and then the subsequent 2% increase in salary costs as a result of the raise. And then there has also been some increases in, I believe, in the range of 7 or more % each year relative to benefits. And so when you have a division area that is heavily personnel based, you're also going to see those increases. But what you don't see in the current operating budget is those pay raises were not included. Those pay raises were included in HB2. So again, you just need to recognize the fact that if you're looking at Chapter 106 laws of 2023 and the operating budget there versus the operating budget today, it's not necessarily easy to draw that comparison. So there's a couple of different drivers there.
I think that may be an understatement, that it's not easy to draw comparisons, but thank you.
Staying in Bureau of Field Services, Accounting Unit 7906 on page 862, you'll see here that we are funding, with mostly federal funds, a number of contracts. Our Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths assessment tool, which ensures that is part of the assessment process in our juvenile justice transformation, and ensures that we're serving youth at the right touch in community-based care or services whenever possible. Our restorative practices around ensuring that youth have some accountability to their victims. We have legal consultation here for youth contemplating the assessment outside of the system, so that if they want to be able to consult with an attorney before agreeing to that process, they're able to do so. So some of the funds in 7906 cover those kinds of contracts. Beginning on slide 11, we have some data to demonstrate some of the work in that Field Services Bureau. So on page 11, you're seeing the total calls to our central intake line. You're seeing there's a slight decrease in total calls for state fiscal year 2024 at the very top of that slide. The bottom section shows the outcome of the call by screen in, and that's the pink line. And those that are calls that are investigated for abuse neglect by our caseworkers. Those that are screened out, which is the blue line, and so those are not sent for investigation. And additional information, which is the yellow line. And the additional information are calls received by central intake that do not meet criteria for abuse neglect, but we are otherwise already involved with the family, so that information is passed on to the caseworker just as supplemental information for their awareness. So in that reddish color with the report screened in, You'll also see that there's a decrease in screened-in calls by over 1,000. And so subsequently, you'll see the number of screened out calls then has also increased. And this is a good trend. This is positive. We want less families being called into DCYF and getting into this deep end of the system. We want our system of care outside of our system to be working for families to have alternatives to meeting their family needs and not to have the only path available is DCYF for them. So this is evidence of the legislature's support around the system of care. And we're seeing that happen.
Representative Nelavanko for a question.
Yeah, again, here I'm seeing, the positive results of, your key accomplishments in terms of some of these measures and metrics, but I'm having a hard time relating it to what's happening with the overall cost structure. But anyhow, that, we've already covered that with some, requests for some additional information that will help us sort out the fruit salad and maybe be able to picture apples, oranges, and other things that are in there.
Moving to slide 12. This shows a trend over calendar years 21 to 24 of screened in reports. So again, those calls that come to intake that do meet criteria for investigation for abuse and neglect. And you'll see that each year follows a similar trend. The lowers of screened-in reports are fewer in the summer months. You'll also note the pink trend line for calendar year 24 shows a decrease in screened-in reports by month over the past years. And again-
Representative Talarsky for a
Just
question.
A quick question, looking on this data, would you say that that's due to the child being in school and schools being such a vital part of protection of children?
Yes,
Thanks.
most definitely. Moving to slide 13. Once a call is screened in, it's sent on for our investigators, our caseworkers at the district office level to investigate. And so you're seeing here the average assessments assigned per CPSW from 2024 in December to December of 2024. It's a fairly steady trend, a few dips here and there, but fairly steady. Our caseload goal is 12 active investigations per caseworker. And that goal was established back in 2019 when we had received additional caseworker positions. We've not quite reached that goal, but we've hovered around 12 on some occasions. Slide 14 shows the open cases. So once our investigators have made the determination, if we need to open a case, here is where we're looking at the data of open cases. So the top of slide 14 shows that number of open cases for our family service caseworkers. You'll see a very minimal increase in open cases since 2021 by less than 50 between state fiscal years 22 and 24. And so this reinforces something we're seeing, which is that the families coming to our attention have greater needs, right? Because we're seeing fewer calls, but we're not seeing necessarily a significant drop in cases. So those calls coming to our attention are families that have greater needs. The bottom portion of this slide shows the numbers of children served. So the pink being the total served when you combine in-home and in-placement. The blue breaking it down by children in placement. And the gold being children in home. And the green prevention cases are those children being served outside of DCYF through our community-based voluntary services. On slide 15, you're seeing a promising trend in the past 90 days, essentially. Since November of 2024, we've seen a 7% decrease in children served in out-of-home care, and then inversely, a 7% increase in children served in their own homes. So that's a trend that we want to see and would be in the right direction. On slide 16, you're seeing our family service caseload. So these are our open cases. So this is the trend of the average number of open cases per caseworker from December of 2021 to December of 2024. And the goal here is 10, again, established in 2019 with our Senate Bill 6 caseworker positions at that time. We're seeing stability over time and typically about 12 to 13 cases per worker.
Representative Telersky for a question.
Thank you. I'm looking at how this goes back to the end of 21, and while it's relatively stable, don't see really any reduction. And over the last few years, I know that that was hopefully a goal. So what is still holding you up in this?
Well, I think this is similar to what I mentioned, where we're seeing fewer calls to intake. So what this says to me, though, is the calls that are coming in have greater needs. Certainly, we need legal criteria to open cases and court oversight, and so the needs of families is greater than it was.
Thanks.
Slide 17, we did take a look at already. That was our juvenile justice youth served in-home and through our assessment and through residential treatment. Slide 18 shows the average number of cases assigned per juvenile probation and parole officer. So the numbers stayed fairly consistent despite that JJ assessment process. And again, I think it's similar that, and we saw that on the last slide where we're seeing that dip in-home cases for the assessment process. We also know that some of our JPPOs are involved in carrying those assessment cases and also carrying permanency cases to ensure that our juvenile justice youth are getting to permanency as quickly as possible. So we're seeing fairly consistent numbers here as well.
Representative Daniels for a question.
Yeah, thank you. On an average, how long does it take to close a case?
It's certainly dependent if it's an in-home or out-of-home case. So typically about a year or less would be a potential target for an in-home case where the family remains together. But again, there's attorneys involved for juvenile justice representing the youth. There's the court oversight process ultimately orders the closure of a case once it's open. So it's dependent on a number of factors, but a year could be a nice target.
Thank you.
Representative Nelevanko for a question.
Yes, thank you very much. A quick question on, of the cases you close, how many do you have to reopen?
I don't have that data with me.
Is
but we can
that,
get
I mean, minimal, or is it, a handful, or,
I think it's fair. It's less than the number that come in at the onset. I think it's fairly minimal, but I don't have that exact data with me. But certainly, when we close a case, we connect families with their communities, with the services that they can access independent of DCYF. So more often than not, they're able to function independently without our agency.
okay, thanks.
On slide 19 is the agency count of youth and out-of-home care. And you'll see the pink line is 2024. And overall, we're looking at from 2021 to 2024 is the span. And so that pink line being 2024, you're seeing a promising trend. And I showed this in an earlier slide with the child protection as well, in the decrease of the number of children served out of their homes since about March, when we look at all the data. On slide 20, this is our kinship data that I highlighted earlier. And so this is children where they're placed in out-of-home care, and also count of children is there on the axis. So what's really exciting here is that gold kinship care line, and the pink is the foster care trend line. And so you're really starting to see a division since last fall between numbers of children served in kinship care as opposed to foster care. And so we're really excited to see the disparity growing there. We certainly want more kids served in kinship care. And then the blue trend line is showing the residential treatment line, which is fairly stable. On slide 21, we're moving into our SYSC budget, our Sununi Youth Services budget. This is on page 864 on the governor's budget, and accounting unit 6643. So the Sununi Youth Services Center is our secure treatment facility for youth in New Hampshire. We are certainly seeing a decrease in our census, and I have other slides for that coming up in a moment. And we're building our new facility, which should be opened in Hampstead by late summer, early fall of 2026. So that process is in place. The number of kids served there is certainly declined over time. We're seeing typical range of about 12 to 18 youth at any given time. We ensure that we have an appropriate staffing pattern that allows for the safety of youth and staff. We tend to, during awake hours on first shift, we have 14 youth counselors. Second shift, we have 15. And overnights, we have 10. And on weekends, we ensure to staff first and second shift, the awake shifts, at 15 youth counselors. We know that we'll always need the capacity to spread youth to various units for many reasons. We could have a youth needing a period of crisis stabilization. We certainly have new admissions coming in. We could have a medical need to need to have youth be separated. So we need to make sure, despite having perhaps 12 to 18 youth, that we have the staff available to spread across the various units as needed. We sometimes have court orders to keep youth separated. They could be, they could have the same charges. They could have been brought in for similar charges or the same charges in the same crime. And so we need that capacity to be able to spread youth across the facility as needed.
Representative Nelevenko for a question, followed by Representative Stringham.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On page 864, budget lines 102, 103, it looks like a fairly hefty increase. Is this another case of money moving from someplace else, or expenses moving from someplace else?
Sure. So one of the things that we've had to rely on is contracted agency staff. And so you can see in the first state fiscal year 2024 what the actual expense is there. We've tried to account for that within the class 103 line this year so that we can recognize those costs. There were other increases as well. Just while we're on the topic, I can go through a couple of those just so that they make a little bit more sense. Another fairly significant change is if you look at in-state travel, you'll see in state fiscal year 24, it was 126,000, and in the budget it was $500. So we budgeted $500, but we spent 167,000.
Sorry, where am I looking?
So I'm looking at the old budget right now for the $500, but you would be looking at the in-state travel line in class 70. So what happened was there was a change within the collective bargaining agreement where if individuals are traveling to cover an overtime shift, that we pay portal-to-portal miles for those individuals working at the Sununi Youth Services Center. I believe it was also in state fiscal year 24 where we had to, where this was extended to other employees from the department that were coming to cover shifts where we didn't have sufficient staffing. And I'll let Marie talk about sort of the progress on the staffing levels.
Sure, and you'll recall that was one of the highlights was the decrease in vacancies for the youth counselor position. So we've got 46 full-time youth counselors in total. I can tell you just a few years back, we had 7 of those filled. Remember trying to contemplate how we're going to staff the facility with 7 people. And so now our vacancy is down. We have 6 vacant positions right now at SYSC. And so we've made significant progress, but certainly we were required to pay overtime for other people in the department in DCYF to come fill shifts at SYSC, and the collective bargaining agreement called for pay for them for their travel. And of course, their overtime was significant as well. So we've made significant progress in that area.
So just a quick follow-up. So line 103, what just help me understand operations services covers what, and then there's a pretty, again, a significant jump up in the expenses, double, I guess.
Sure. So the staffing contract was budgeted at 1.3 million. Tutoring was approximately 300,000, and I don't believe that was budgeted there before. And I can get additional details on the other contracts that are included in that line. I don't recall them off the top of my head. But
Yeah,
I'll
it
get
just
that
looks
for
like
you.
a pretty significant jump up.
Yep.
Representative Stringham, followed by Representative Wallner for questions.
Yeah, thanks. We're still looking at a
103.
population of average of about 12, right?
Yes, 12 to 18, with the goal of 12.
And are you anticipating asking for additional money in 2025? Or is the 12.7 million likely going to be adequate to get us to June 30th to start with?
We're projecting somewhere in the vicinity of $15 million of expenses in the current biennium.
In the second year of the biennium? Or-
In state fiscal year 25.
Thank you. And I'm, just speaking broadly, this is support services for 12 children. That's enough for 500 children who are just to pay for the school system, including a quarter of that being special needs support. So it is a tremendous investment that we're making in these kids, and I am concerned with the rate of growth in these numbers. And I'm just wondering if are there any other ideas or things you have in mind to bring these numbers down, or to bring down the contract or overtime services numbers down more than you have so far?
So we are implementing a trauma-informed model called Target that will roll out. All of our clinicians are all trained. Our milieu staff will also be trained, so that we're hoping to have youth and staff focus on the trauma-reactive symptoms and behaviors that we're seeing of these youth. So that is one idea that we hope will bring some stability, and will also help with recidivism once kids launch from the facility. But I did talk already about that multidisciplinary group that's coming together to think about alternatives to SYSC, more specifically with the detained youth. But I do have to tell you that the youth that are coming to SYSC are coming often with very, very violent behaviors, assaultive behaviors, harming others, other youth, their family members. And so, this is the deepest end of our system. And so while we hope that the system of care and all of the outside of the agency work might help to catch some of these families, we recognize that we will have a need for a right-sized center. We know it's not 144 beds as it is now. So we're again looking at that 12, and sometimes we're up to 18 with some ability to divert. We are diverting lots of kids with our diversion program and our JJ assessment from stepping into that, even tiptoeing into the deeper part of our system, right? Once kids get into the system, sometimes behaviors exacerbate and then they keep going deeper and deeper. So we've been able to stop there, but we do recognize that the youth coming to the center's attention currently are coming with some pretty significant behavioral challenges.
Thank you. If we could jump to 31, which deals with this new Youth Center. It talks about, it's labeled HB2 budget area for consideration. One thing was this legislature authorized purchase of a body scanner. Is that something that happened or did not happen? And any comment on the 1 million budget cut that's also listed in there?
So the body scanner has been purchased, so we do have it on site at the facility. So what we're currently working through is ensuring we have the right policies and operating procedures for parental consent, youth consent, how males, females might differ regarding their ability to go through a scanning system, what we would do if kids do not consent, if parents do not consent. So we're in the process of creating a policy, but we do have the scanner on site.
But it sounds like it's not being used yet.
It's not being used yet.
Thank you.
Representative Wallner.
Thank you. In previous budgets, we always had, in the Sununu Youth Services Center, we always had a lot of positions for education. How are we doing the education now for these kids?
The education is currently a contract. I think that is class line 74 currently in accounting unit 6643. And we do have a contractor providing a tutoring model to our youth. It's a program that connects with the child's school district. So the child continues to receive the educational services of their individual school district through a tutoring model at the facility.
And just to clarify, currently it's in class 74. It's being moved to the class 103, and that's $300,000 annually.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I wondered about that. So this is sort of looking out into the future, but when we move to the new facility, what do you think the budget will look like? I mean, are you anticipating that the budget will be lower, higher, about the same?
Nathan may want to clarify some of my responses, but we know and we anticipate that there is going to be some capacity for shared services on the Hampstead campus with Hampstead Hospital. As we all know, there's been a new contract, and Dartmouth is currently overseeing the Hampstead Hospital part of the campus. And so we are needing to work through what those shared services will be. We have some ideas. We need to regroup with the new leadership at Hampstead Hospital. So we anticipate being able to see some cost savings, but we have not been able to identify what those are yet until we can work that out with the new contractor.
Do you anticipate any staffing reductions that it would cost less in the new facility?
I think that that's possible. It would not be youth counselors, so youth counselor staff would need to be consistent because we would not be sharing, right? They're separate facilities on a shared campus, so we would not be sharing our youth counselor staff, but perhaps kitchen staff or maintenance staff. There's also the contemplation that perhaps, for example, a new, a larger kitchen or a larger laundry area is needed. So we might need more staff because of that, because we're combining efforts. So it's possible that we could see some staffing shifts, and it's just unknown yet.
And just to add a little bit of background, so the department had brought forward an item to GNC to lease Hampstead Hospital Residential Treatment Facility to Dartmouth. And there were 4 separate agreement types within that sort of larger package. And one of those was a transition services agreement, where basically the state would continue to provide for the contracted services that the state was receiving, and then Dartmouth reimburses us for those costs plus a small admin cost. So we're still working out I just want to provide this for context. We're still working with Dartmouth, and they're still making their long-term strategic decisions on which of those contracts they're going to keep, what they're going to absorb, whether they're going to go out to bid. And so they're working on that transition component, which is why we don't yet have an answer for what the shared services will look like until they kind of make their own operational decisions so that we can evaluate what can be shared at that point in time.
And one more question I have is around medical payments to providers. Do we have nurses on staff 24 hours a day?
Yes, we do.
So we have a nurse for every shift.
We do have nursing on
And
staff.
so these payments are to providers that you have to take the children to the doctor or
Correct. It could be labs
hospital
or
or-
clinical labs drawn needed, maybe x-rays if an x-ray needed to happen for a youth for some reason. But yes, so it would be those kinds of off-site things. We also have a contract for a hygienist and a dentist who come on site to be able to provide that kind of care right in the facility. So that's also included here.
And how many nurses do we have on staff?
I don't know that number exactly. I can get that for you.
All right, thank you.
Representative Telersky, followed by Representative Nelavanko.
Thank you. When we talk about this group of children with such high extreme needs, it brought to mind the conversation around out-of-state placements. Is that going to come, or is that embedded in this group of children in the budget? That's not the right way to communicate that, but.
So our residential treatment, as we discussed in field services, includes the in-state and out-of-state.
Okay, so we already went past that. All right.
But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I guess I sort of missed my opportunity to
It's
look
okay.
at the numbers. Just quickly, how many children do you have out of state right now?
We have about, I would say, close to 60 children out of state.
60.
60.
Okay.
But
In New
50
England?
of those would be in the New England area, with about 8 out of what we call out of region, so out of New England.
Okay. And your site visits and check-ins, has that changed at all? Or budget-wise, did you account for any of those changes you might have needed?
Yes, so Senate Bill 417 provided significant changes to the work that DCYF does with our monthly visits and our preference for how we place children, ensuring the least restrictive setting possible first. So we do have prioritized need.
Okay.
I'm going to pass that to Nathan to talk about for 417.
Sure. So we had a couple of prioritized needs. SB 417 created a total of 10 positions, 8 CPSWs and 2 JPPOs to address those needs, as well as travel dollars. We do have some of the travel money that was added during the governor's phase. The positions were not explicitly funded within the accounting units, though, at this stage of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a kind of a general question and, partly a demographics type question. What impact, if any, and what on the clientele is related to refugee families or immigrant families? Is that part and parcel of, and, have you seen any impact of that?
So we don't have data specific to the refugee population, but certainly we serve all families that come to our attention. I know we've gotten some questions recently with some of the federal changes, whether we're seeing any kind of increase in that population of family, and we're not seeing any new information or new families coming to our attention at this time as a result of any federal changes.
Thank you.
Representative Priest for a question.
Yes, Madam Chairman, thank you for taking my question. The settlement that is going on now with the children that have been housed in the Sununu Youth Service, is there a line item of potential settlement fees, or how are you handling it?
So that's handled by the Department of Justice. I believe in prior legislative session, a trust fund was established. I think at the time $100 million was put into there, and that's administered again by the Department of Justice. DHHS is not involved in the distribution of those funds, nor do we oversee them.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I wanted to say additionally for regarding the children placed out of state, and specifically in the New England region, is that we often find that some of the bordering towns actually have programs that are in closer proximity to the family homes than a northern program, say for a Keene or a Nashua family. So I just did want to make that distinction, and that's why we monitor closely New England versus out of region placements. And Representative Wallner, to answer your question to the number of nurses at the SYSC, there's 7 nurses. Thank you.
Representative Priest for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question again. On the total number of positions, are these employees that are being moved to, I mean, it's an increase of 10 new positions on page 865, down toward the end.
Those are the 10 positions I referred to earlier. They were established, but when we look globally at the funding, I believe those are not funded sufficiently. So that's the SB 417 positions that were created. That's the 8 CPSWs and 2 JPPOs. Sorry, Child Protective Service workers.
Okay,
Just
okay.
to spell that out.
Thank you.
And moving to slide 22. And in slide 22 shows the trend line. And this is over a significant period of time, since 2020 to 2024, to just show the significant decrease in the census at SYSC over time, from this 144 bed facility down towards 12 to 18 that we see currently. I'm moving to slide 23, and this is the Office of the Director. This is back to the beginning of the governor's budget on page 848. And in this budget, we're seeing the director and deputy director, our constituent relations program, which is our forward-facing, our public-facing team of employees who can manage questions, go out and provide information on mandatory reporting to groups of people. So this is our public-facing team of 2 employees. We have our field administrators here, and we have 2 employees who focus on the secondary trauma and the safety of our staff, which really has been a boost to our retention. You'll see here 35 employees, and some are moved to other accounting units. So that's where you might see a decrease in the personnel.
Thank you. And that was the accounting unit referred to earlier.
2956.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you. And I'm moving to slide 24, which is our Bureau of Community, Family, and Program Support. This is on page 853 in the governor's budget, and it's accounting unit 2296. And so in this particular accounting unit, we have, this is 100% federal funding. We have our LADAC, which is our licensed alcohol and drug abuse counselor contract to work with families and youth affected by substances. And we also have our community navigator contract that I referenced at Central Intake to support families and people concerned about families with pointing them in the right direction outside of the agency when possible. In accounting unit 2297, which is on page 854.
Just a very quick,
sorry.
just a very quick question on the contracts for program services for fiscal year 2025. Are we running pretty much according to that number, or above or below?
So there's 2 contracts there, the LADAC contract and the Community Navigator contract. I would have to go back to the invoicing detail and statement of appropriations to understand where we're at. These are 100% federal funds. It's a Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. So they're designated for specific purposes and specific uses. But I'd have to go back and see where we're at today. Okay. And recognizing that I'm pretty certain these are cost reimbursement, and we often will see delays in the invoicing that we receive in excess of a month or 2 months or 3 months. So a point in time today may not show you the full picture of what the state fiscal year expenditure need represents.
So the state lays out the money and then later gets reimbursed for it.
No, so the opposite. So by default, many of our contracts are cost reimbursement in the sense that the provider, the vendor, the contractor, they incur a cost and they submit an invoice with detailed expenses and supporting documentation. We review it, and then once we make a determination that the services were provided and or allowable, then we go ahead and make the payment.
Okay, so it's just a misunderstanding of which way the reimbursement was working.
Yes, we do not assume the risk.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to accounting unit 2297, which is on page 854 of the governor's budget. Again, these are 100% federal funds. These are our funds for some of our adolescent programs. Our Chafee dollars, which are used for youth in care, age 14 to 21 and up to age 23 if they're in aftercare voluntarily, to provide things like housing, food, car repairs, car insurance. So ancillary services to support adolescents who are launching to adulthood. Also our ETV funds, education and training voucher funds for youth 18 to 26 who are attending college or career training. Moving to accounting unit 2959 on page 851. This is funding for our domestic violence programs. And the funding that we're paying out for this is for the Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We also receive family violence prevention specialists, so folks from the coalition who are located in our district offices alongside our caseworkers for support to families requiring those services and consultation for our staff. Moving to accounting unit 2961, which is on page 852. And this is our foster care health program, which are the nursing staff, the nurses available in our district offices, again, co-located, our staff working alongside our caseworkers regarding the complex medical needs of children that we serve, also monitoring psychotropic medications provided by outside providers as a secondary set of oversight of those kinds of medications to ensure that we're supportive of the interventions being provided. And I'll move to slide 25, which is a continuation of that same Bureau of Community, Family, and Program Supports. Moving to accounting unit 2969 on page 854 of the governor's budget. This is our CAPTA dollars, which are 100% federal funds. This is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. This is the work that we do with families to support their reunification, to celebrate their reunification, help them be reminded of how far they've come and their ability to be self-sufficient in the communities. Accounting unit 2973 on page 855. This is our promoting safe and stable families, and this is our includes our kinship care work and our the work that we're doing to recruit and retain our kinship caregivers. There's also a training component for those caregivers through our training contractor in here. And moving to accounting unit 3443 on page 859. In this accounting unit is a significant number dollars for the services that we provide. So those community-based services that we were talking about to support not only caregivers, but families who remain in home. And so there's a number of contracts here. We have our community-based voluntary services, which we talked about, is case management. Once we determine we've done an investigation, there is no abuse, neglect, we're able to refer families for case management to two vendors outside of the agency for case management and support. So that contract is here. We have a contract for our after hours central intake, our hotline. We rely on a contractor to respond and answer and process the reports received outside of normal business hours. We also have a Strength to Succeed contract, which is a contract built around a model of adults with lived experience in substance use and trauma who we connect with families directly to receive that coaching and support in order to help families feel like they can be successful in their work to sobriety and to maintaining their mental health stability. And we also have a couple of contracts in here based on services. One in particular is our Intercept service, which is a service specifically designed and is one of our Family First Prevention and Service Act evidence-based services, which is meant to be intensive in-home supports to maintain the family intact. And additionally, post-reunification. So if a child had to have an out-of-home episode and has since been reunified, the Intercept program is a service that we can put in place to help maintain that family post-reunification to be successful.
Representative Nalavanko for a question.
Again, this is probably the same kind of a question. They're all zeros in here when I'm looking at the governor's budget. And this is something that has shifted from someplace else, I guess.
Yes, so we moved funds the positions and the funding that we were referring to earlier. So there's four separate accounts: 2956, 2957, 2973, and 2961, from which these dollars came. We can do something similar and provide a crosswalk so it's clear to the committee sort of how the dollars moved around.
Yeah, that would, I mean, definitely help.
Sure.
Help get my head around the numbers.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Seaworth for a question.
Thank you very much. Could you give a quick summary? So this is close to 50-50 with the federal funding. How is the federal funding determined in this category?
So the personnel would likely be cost allocated. It would be, in this case, I'm assuming many of these individuals will be either conducting a random moment study or random time study to document how their time is spent. And most likely it would be 4E eligible. And so that's kind of, I think early on we talked a little bit about cost allocation, and it's kind of our budget is a point of departure. We make assumptions around what we would expect. So most of the time there we'd expect 50-50. Depending upon the nature of any unique contracts, that might change, which is why you wouldn't necessarily see a 50-50 split across all funds, because it would the cost would need to be allowable to be claimed.
Moving to slide 26. This is a new bureau, Professional and Strategic Development, and we're looking at accounting unit 3220 on page 857 of the governor's budget. And so in this accounting unit, we're seeing our employee training contract sits here. And so we do have a robust training model for our new staff. We call it Core Academy. It trains our child protective workers, our JPPOs, our juvenile probation and parole officers, and our youth counselors. It's about an 8-week program, taking probably closer to 3 months because of some time off to do some work back at their office, shadowing other employees. It's also training for, it provides ongoing training beyond the core training. It also provides training for our residential treatment providers and our caregivers. So it provides all of our training needs.
A very quick question. Could you Could you kind of roughly characterize what kinds of training?
Absolutely, yes. So for our child protective service workers, the investigative training, there are certain tracks. There's some trainings that are carry forward to all of our client-facing position, and then there's certain tracks. So for our investigators, there would be trainings around interviewing, engaging with families and making sure that we have the ability to sit and partner with families and listen to them and understand their needs. That would be a training that would be unique across all of them. For our youth counselors, they'd receive special training on being in the milieu, on their units, how to de-escalate a youth whose symptoms may be exacerbated and maybe having some challenging behaviors. For our family service, our ongoing caseworkers in child protection, they would have specific training around case planning with children. All of the areas have training unique to the legal aspects of their jobs, what to expect in court, how they might write particular reports or information. So we'll have different trainers come in with the specialty in those particular areas in order to enhance our staff initial education.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Representative Priest for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. Again, as a clarification, this new line item 3220 is supposed to take care of all the training needs for this division. Is that correct?
There was a reference to a training contract in a prior, in the kinship as well. But
Right.
yes, the bulk of our training happens here.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We also have some contracts in this accounting unit. We have a contract for a program that we call Risk and Safety Consultation, which is meant to be a quality assurance control over our most intensive investigations. So those that require the most care, the most investigative processes to ensure that we have a group of staff also reviewing. It's a very small team, but we have a small team reviewing alongside our district offices to ensure that nothing safety related is overlooked. So it's a coaching model and a quality improvement model. So you'll see that contract sits in here. We also do have our CANS contract sits here as well, which is our Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths tool that our juvenile justice assessment team is using to assess the needs and strengths of youth to be able to then ensure we can meet those needs. We're going to be carrying that over to our child protective staff as well. So those contracts sit here. In addition to training in this unit, we, as I mentioned, we have the risk and safety consultation that those coaches for our investigators. We also have implementation science staff who are focused on delivering special projects, our strategic priorities, for example, monitoring, reviewing the data that comes out of that, making sure that we're staying on track. So that sits within this bureau. Moving to slide 27 on page 858. This is Accounting Unit 3221. This is our Bureau of Evaluation, Analytics, and Reporting. This is a small team that comprises the DCYF Data Analytics team, our Quality Assurance and Improvement team, and our Federal Reporting. So in class line 26, I wanted to point out, this is our a data analytics service that scours the DCYF data each day. So every single morning we can come in and be able to review a dashboard. Our caseworkers can look at things regarding their casework, which clients might need to be seen, any number of data points regarding permanency and out-of-home care and face-to-face contact with children and families. So it provides a dashboard of available information that helps not only field workers, but all levels of the agency monitor practice and see where we need to pay attention. Moving to slide 28 on page 860. This is a new accounting unit. So many of these staff were originally in that, if you remember, there were 35 staff in the director's office previously. So this is a new accounting unit, which is comprised of our general counsel, which includes our policy and form development and our child abuse and neglect central registry, as well as our business information systems group of staff, which oversee our case management system, our legacy system that we currently have, as well as will focus on the build and rollout of our new electronic case management system and provide overall IT support. This is, and I'm sorry, I think I failed to mention, this is accounting unit 3444 on page 860. And there's a few contracts overseen here in the information systems group. In particular, our SYSC case management system BizStream is this contract sits here. As does a couple other contracts. We're developing a contract for video storage and viewing. So kids who have experienced significant neglect and abuse often receive their initial child interview at a child advocacy center when a crime could have been committed, where there's forensically trained interviewers and law enforcement, perhaps county attorney's office, DCYF staff can all participate in the child interview at the same time to minimize reliance on minimize duplicative interviews of a child victim. And so those interviews are videotaped, and we're needing to ensure that we have storage, that we have the software available to view those interviews that are coming to us through the child advocacy centers. And so we have a contract here to ensure that we don't lose that important evidence as we're trying to protect children. So those are a couple of the contracts in this accounting unit. Moving to slide 29. We did talk a bit about this already. This is the Senate Bill 463 and 417. 417 is the oversight of residential treatment, which impacts enhanced oversight by our child protective service workers and the courts, and outlines the order of preference of how children's placement is contemplated. Senate Bill 463 is a new bill that would require that children in residential treatment will have court-appointed counsel that will represent their expressed interest. Again, for any child in residential treatment, and that could be expanded to any other child interested in that representation. And our field staff will be informing the children of their right, notifying court, and that will have a phased-in approach. But that was defrayed in the governor's budget.
Representative Woolner for a question.
Thank you. So Senate Bill 463 spent a lot of time in this committee last year. And could you remind me what, on these lines, I guess you have it on 2 pages, right? It's both on page 29 and then again on page 30.
Representative Wallner, it looks like there was a printing error. I would just, it looks like page 29 was from an earlier version as we were updating it. So I would go ahead and strike out on your document, page 29, as the accurate numbers are located on page 30. Apologize for that.
Okay, because I was trying to figure out, are these two different things, but, okay. So I guess my question is, what exactly does the department need funding to do? And because this is not the attorneys, this is not the lawyers for the children.
Correct. So our fiscal note contemplated an additional 14 CPSWs. So what we know and appreciate, and we believe that kids' express rights deserve to be brought to the attention of the court and all the parties. We also know that there'll be additional needs on the behalf of our child protective caseworkers, having meetings with kids to inform them of their rights, filling out forms for kids that are going to for all of the kids in residential treatment, plus other kids who request an attorney. We know that because this is for residential treatment, to contemplate that most youth will have the expressed wish to remain in residential treatment is unlikely. We anticipate there'll be motions, hearings, additional work being done with those attorneys to make sure that we are able to meet those youth needs.
So can you, I guess I have a hard time understanding what 14 new positions would do. I mean, you're informing the children. They already have, I assume they already have a social worker.
Yes.
They already have a social worker. How much time would this add if, say, there were no CPS, no new 14? How much time would this add, do you think, to the average social workers' work with their clients?
I think it will be the court hearings and the motions and working with the attorneys that would be most of the time. Yes, there'd be forms and discussions that need to be held, but we anticipate the majority of the time will be spent in court. Or in working with those attorneys around, again, the express wishes of those youth impacted. So the 14 amounts to about one new CPSW per area, with a couple of our larger offices receiving 2. But so it would be one additional CPSW to spread the casework responsibility.
So presently, since the children don't get a lawyer, that work doesn't get done? Or are the CPSWs having to do some of that work in court?
Well, currently all of the children receive a guardian ad litem, which could be a CASA or an attorney guardian litem. And those people are looking into the best interests of the children, and it might not align with the child's interest. So this, with the counsel that would be coming on board, it's the express interest. So what the child is saying they want, regardless of what someone else thinks is their best interest. So we'll have a guardian ad litem for each child, and also a court-appointed attorney talking about what the child wishes. So we anticipate with the residential treatment that there will be many additional steps to be taken with a child protective worker, with that attorney, with perhaps court, with motions, with filings, and discussion around what else we could do to meet that child's needs that would be new than is currently happening today.
So presently, though, the social worker must be meeting with the CASAs and the guardian ad litems, right?
Yes.
So they're already involved in doing some of that kind of oversight, making sure that everyone's, I guess, doing what they're supposed to be doing.
That's correct.
That falls to the social worker at this time.
Yes, it does.
Okay, I guess I still have a really hard time understanding how having the child have their own lawyer is going to cause it to be more work for the social worker. But I'll take your word for it that at least the department thinks it would increase the need. So this was it was also in the legislation, it was going to be phased in. So it would be just a few children and then added, I think it was by age.
That's correct.
That they
Over
were going to
time.
be phased
Yep.
in. And even even with the phase in, you still feel like you still need 14 additional workers?
Yes, we do believe best interests and express interests are going to be two very different things. And so we anticipate needing another staff in each office due to the additional work that will be on each of our staff.
Thank you.
Representative Stringham for a question.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a few weeks to go over it, but it seemed to me that my memory of the discussion we had on this, that they thought there was at least equal offsetting expenses in another category by adding the staff. And I don't know if you can speak to that or whether we'll just wait and see if my memory is accurate and in the process of working on the budget over the next few weeks.
I don't think I can speak to that. I'm sorry.
And just for general awareness, SB 463, it was passed during the legislative session of 2024, but it had a July 1 of 2025 start date, so starting in the next biennium. And so there's two components to the prioritized need. One is the CPSWs here, and then there was a prioritized need relative to DCYF attorneys, 5 DCYF attorneys, but those attorneys are actually budgeted in legal and regulatory affairs. So when Melissa St. Cyr was here maybe almost 2 weeks ago now, that would impact her budget area. And those were the costs that were recognized in the department's analysis that showed up in the LBA's fiscal note on that bill, but that bill made no appropriation. And currently in the draft HB2, that particular effective date has been delayed until the start of the next biennium.
Moving to slide 32.
Can we, I have questions on slide 30. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
Just looking down the prioritized needs there on slide 30. Can you just, maybe we touched on this and I apologize, that $9 million in 27 for Medicaid loss of funding for residential. What is that?
Sure. So we included in our original agency budget request an $18 million general fund request for the loss of the Medicaid dollars, and that goes back to the discussion relative to the QRTP IMD, where we're no longer going to be able to claim those Medicaid funds. That's been partially funded in the governor's recommended budget. So the $9 million is the anticipated remaining amount that we projected when we prepared our budget request.
Representative Stringham for a question.
Can you comment on the residential rate increase and foster care rate increases? What percentage that represents?
I can go back and get you what percentage that may represent. I think what's important to understand is that it doesn't mean a 4% increase for everybody. That number was based on an analysis where we collected cost report data from the residential treatment providers, and we looked at what the costs were to deliver the services. And so that number represents that level of analysis. And so there would be variations between each of those residential providers. So it's not necessarily a fixed rate. Do you know the foster care rate percent? We can provide that to you.
For the foster care rate increases, and again, we realize there's costs here, but these, both residential and foster care, are essential services to our service array to ensure that kids receive the treatment. We have places for kids to go who require out-of-home care because their home is dangerous, right? So that's when we determine that a child is not safe in their home. So we need these available options to be able to serve New Hampshire's children. In regard to the foster care rate increases, there is a calculation regarding cost of living, cost to raise a child. So there is a method that we calculated in order to consider what kind of foster care raises should happen on an annual basis to ensure that people can care for the children that placed in their home. And so I do have the daily foster care rates and the anticipated rate per day. And just in general, for state fiscal year 2025, they range from about $34 a day up to about $50 a day, depending on the age of the child. And then we also have other specialized kinds of rates, emergency or crisis care that a family may provide to us. So we can provide you these rates so that you can see the rate increases over time based on the daily rate that we established.
As follow-up, the residential rate increase, which is a cost-based reimbursement. So if we don't provide this amount, we would have to necessarily reduce the number of residential units that we have available to meet the budget.
So what it would mean is potentially a couple of different things. One is we hold the daily reimbursement rate steady with no change. So for the current state fiscal year, there were no increases because there was no money budgeted for that purpose. If the prioritized needs request is not approved, then we wouldn't have money to provide rate increases for 26 or 27.
And similarly for foster care, the prioritized need would cover the anticipated rate increases that we have calculated for foster care.
Representative Wallner for question.
Did I understand you to just say there was no rate increase for foster care or residential treatment, residential care in this biennium? The one, no, there was.
So the first year for residential, there was a rate increase, but in the second year of the biennium, we didn't have funds sufficient to provide that rate increase in the second year.
So they got one rate increase during the biennium.
Yes, for residential, yes.
And what about foster care? Did they have a rate increase? Yes.
I believe they did. Yeah.
One rate increase.
Yep.
Okay.
And to your question, Representative Stringham, regarding residential treatment. So certainly we hear from providers the challenges that they have to meet their budget. And so it does concern us that not being able to provide the funding that they need to run their program could minimize the number of programs or beds that we have, could cause us to need additional beds out of state. Out of state programs are certainly more costly. We're sending staff out to visit these programs on a monthly basis to meet with kids in the program areas who serve them. So, we certainly hope that we can, at a minimum, keep the programs that we have in state.
Representative Novolenko for a question.
Nelevenko. This is just kind of a curiosity question. We send kids to other states, and other states have their own programs for handling this. What interaction, or is there any potential for, instead of doing the travel there, cooperating with other states, reimbursing them, and everybody saves money by having it handled, in the location where the child is actually located?
Mm-hmm. There is actually a process for that called the Interstate Compact for the placement of children, and it allows for that reciprocity and that capacity for other states to monitor the children in their state. With the passage of Senate Bill 417, we are now legislatively required to go out, the person that knows the child, to do those visits directly. So that is a direct impact of that legislation. So we will always be traveling to meet with the children in our care on a monthly basis.
So if I understand it, we're not really taking full advantage of the compact.
As it relates to residential treatment, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Telersky.
I was just, for the representative, SB 417 was, came out of an unfortunate situation of New Hampshire children that were in an out-of-state placement that was unsafe to them and inhumane. And so the legislation was filed to protect the children and make sure that they have more regular visits from people here in the Granite State who are looking out for their care.
Thank you. That's kind of educational for me because I'm new to the,
Moving to slide 32, which is essentially the last detailed slide that I have here. This is simply a depiction of some of the service delivery impacts and how that affects our caseworkers at DCYF. And so ultimately, caseworkers are responsible for the needs of the children and families on their caseload. And so when we have fiscal impacts that impact things like foster care and foster parents and residential rates and transportation cuts or inability to provide the rate that meets the provider needs, that does fall on the caseworker. In a recent example, our transportation provider needed to cut back some of the work that they did. So what that means is our caseworkers are getting up before work, they're traveling to pick up children, drive them to school, drive them to family time and visits. If we have foster parents and that we can't retain or they're impacted by finances, it means fewer foster homes. It means our staff traveling to visit children further and further away, whether that's in residential or foster care. So really, I just wanted to make the connection between sometimes just not having some of this. It doesn't mean it's just simply not available. It means it has to get picked up somewhere. And the majority of these things get picked up by our caseworkers who are extremely dedicated, passionate about the work that they do. Again, we're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, meeting the needs of our most vulnerable population. And so I wanted to be able to highlight that here to just show how that does impact the work we do. And ultimately, when our caseworkers are doing some more of those ancillary aspects of the work, they're ultimately spending less time doing their casework with children and families.
Representative Daniels for a question.
Thank you. Can visitations be done virtually?
So we do some off. So in addition to our monthly face-to-face contact, which must happen, we do in between. We can do some kinds of virtual contact, phone contact or video conference. Certainly support families who can't make a meeting to be able to do so remotely. But we are required in-person, face-to-face contact monthly.
Representative Stringham for a question.
I thank you for this slide and of course all the work that you and your staff do for the children in our state. And I had written down this question to ask you what you thought the state of mind and of the caseworkers are. Are they feeling overburdened? Are they on the brink of being burned out, or are they kind of in a happier place? How would you overall characterize where we are in here? And if you have any recommendations, outside of what's in the budget already, I'd be interested as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Child welfare work, child protection, juvenile justice is challenging. It's tough. The secondary trauma is intense. The things that they see, experience, read, talk to kids about, it's very, very difficult and challenging. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with our management team, so a group of our senior supervisors, administrators, and I was hearing them talk to me as I'm talking about our priorities about how overwhelmed their staff are. All good things. Senate Bill 417 is very complicated, requires a lot of their time. We've had countless new forms and processes and standard operating procedures, as a result of something that seems like really good legislation. And we do want to protect kids. We want to be there for kids. But each and every one thing that happens has an immense ripple effect on our staff. So our staff are overwhelmed. We try to support the best we can. We have that safety culture team that I mentioned in the director's office budget, trying to support their secondary trauma needs. What we know is any bit of negative media attention, whether it's YDC litigation, whether it's other litigation, whether it's a story from 10 years ago, what that does and the impact that that has on our staff is pretty intense. It erodes family trust. It erodes the way that people communicate with us. It erodes the way community partners communicate with us. Our staff get threatened all of the time. We were at a pretty high number. We have documented 50 threats to our staff in calendar year 2024. So we track that. We try to support them. We offer them help. But it is a very challenging job. And while we've made a lot of progress on our retention, that just speaks to the commitment of our team and their ability to stick with it and to want to do better for kids and families. And so we remain fully committed. We remain wanting to always do better. We have a lot of work to do. We acknowledge that. It's nice to also acknowledge some of the good work that we do for our staff, to feel like people know the commitment that they have, the good work that they do, the 24/7 operation that we maintain. So overall, I appreciate your question. It's tough. It ebbs and flows depending on the temperature in the community and on the new practices that roll out and come to fruition. But we remain a committed group of about 750 people.
Representative Nalavanko for question.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to commend you for the presentation that you've given today. Very informative, very detailed.
Thank you.
You know, subject to getting some of the simplification on where the money was moving around. But I'm wondering if, you know, you made mention of the fact that you've got a whole array of complex rules, regulations, and everything. Is there anything that, you know, you might do to recommend to the legislature places where we could reduce without harming any of the quality of the services that you from your side of it could say some of these rules, these regulations, and administrative aspects of this could be streamlined or simplified that would at one and the same time improve the operations, the quality, and maybe even contribute to the morale.
I can give some more thought to that. You know, I think we appreciate the flexibility even in some of our contracts. It would be nice to know that if we do really significant active contract management, so knowing that we could have the ability to say, you know, this contract isn't living up maybe to the benefits that we would have hoped for families. So be able to pivot that money and apply it in a way that is for the services that work, right? That flexibility is greatly appreciated. I think anything that we can also do around prevention. So serving families outside of the DCYF agency is where, and it's not to divert the work that DCYF needs to do. I know the work that we need to do. You probably all see the work that we need to do, but there has to be equal attention on the outside of the system, the education system, the medical providers, the folks that see families and kids every single day that can catch that kid that they notice in school drifting off, that they're knowing is staying up late, you know, perhaps something's going on in the home. So there's such an array of 211 and other services, family resource centers, places that we can point families and catch them before they get to the place of, you know, an unfortunate neglect or abusive situation happening. We know abuse often happens in the context of everyday events. We know most families don't wake up and say, I'm going to abuse my child today, right? There's things that happen, and families are complex systems. And so I think as a community, as a group of citizens in New Hampshire, to the extent that we can consider how we divert attention to the earlier point in our communities and away from our system is really where I hope to see a large focus of our work.
I'll just make one other a further comment, is that certainly I have a vested interest. I have 15 grandkids and have 5 adult children that are married. So I'm have some familiarity with the issues and the challenges that are presented. So, you're doing great work, and hopefully we can help you do it in a more efficient, cost-effective, and timely manner.
Thank you.
Representative Daniels for a question.
Thank you. Compared to the intake numbers, there are significant numbers of screened out things. Have you given any thought as to how you might be able to educate people so that you don't get the calls that don't amount to anything and thereby save time for the workers?
That's a great question. Thank you. We actually were working through a program where we were trying to consider how to provide the community, it was a community response guide, how to provide the community alternatives to reporting. There was mixed reaction from many of our community stakeholders being concerned that people would begin to underreport. But I think there is an avenue to potentially consider how to have in this model, it was going to be almost like a decision-making tree, but less, in my opinion, less about should I report to DCYF? If I'm thinking I should report to DCYF, I should report to DCYF. What we know, because we surveyed some of our reporters, is that it was something like 70% of reporters called in a report to DCYF, not because they actually suspected abuse neglect, but because they knew a family needed help and they didn't know what else to do. And so the effort that we were doing was trying to be a community education, a response guide to say, this family needs help. Let me walk through this online tool. Maybe the outcome will be a report to DCYF. Maybe it will be something else. It could be, again, 211, a pantry, a hotline number. A lot of people realize that something's happening, but they don't know what to do about it to help. So we have. Our community response guide was not funded. Again, it was not appreciated by all members of our oversight bodies, our communities, and so that was reduced in the governor's budget, and I think that's okay. One thing that I can point to, though, is that is kind of a more intense service that we often see some of these families go to, some of our families go to, is our Children's Behavioral Health System of Care, which I believe you'll receive a presentation on this tomorrow through our Division of Behavioral Health. And so that is a way for families to get the help that they need outside of the system. Could even include residential treatment, again, as an episode of treatment. So we're trying to provide all layers of capacity, your very basic support in your communities, the funding the department does to family resource centers, to a system of care that exists with paid services, residential treatment outside of DCYF for families that really need help. And then when you come to DCYF, this vast array of services. So we're trying to catch the various levels. And I think the work still to be done with communities, and we're going to be a partner here to do this, is that just that very early on work to catch. I'm sorry to call out educators and medical providers, but those are the typical people that see kids, from preschool, right up through age 18, and how to make sure that we're communicating enough where those other resources are. So that families do not pick up the phone and we don't have those screen outs that are taking time away, from calls that could come in. The only thing I'll say about screen outs, though, is that it does point to that community navigator program. So I don't want it to appear that those families got nothing from DCYF, so we can refer them to that program where the family and the provider get education about what could be available. You don't need our service, but here's some other things that could be helpful so that that next call doesn't come in.
Well, thank you both very much, Ms. Noonan, Mr. White. Once again, a very thorough, detailed, and informative presentation, and we're very appreciative. So thank you again for all the important work you do. We do recognize this is not easy, and we wish you all the best for another cycle, and certainly are glad you're here. Representative Priest.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And before we end this session, will you be providing us with actual numbers of people that you have serviced instead of giving us a vague description like we've increased or we decreased, whatever that's in your briefing book? That would be very helpful to us.
I'd be happy to do that. Some of the
And if you could
tables,
also go back, if you have the numbers, 5 years, so we can see that you are making progress in this area.
I'd be happy to do that. Some of the tables do have count of youth, but it sounds like you're looking for a bit more detail, so I'd be happy.
Yes, I
Yep.
am looking for much more
Thank you.
detail. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for your time.
At this point, I'm going to open it up to those of the public who wish to make comments. As a time check, we are 2 hours and 44 minutes in. If you do come up, please state your name very clearly and who you represent. Okay, welcome to Division 3.
Are you okay with the twofer?
Okay, yes, okay with the two.
I'm Karen Rosenberg. I'm the policy director at the Disability Rights Center.
I'm Lisa Wolford. Thank you. I'm the executive director of the Children's Law Center of New Hampshire.
And you've heard so much information. You've got so much in front of you. What I'm hoping that we would zero in on, at least what I want to zero in on, is the SB 463, or Right to Counsel for Children in the Foster Care System, that was postponed in the draft governor's HB2. And I just want to remind this committee that, well, first of all, this bill passed on a voice vote on both the Senate side and the House side, and it came out of this committee with a unanimous recommendation ought to pass with an amendment. And what that amendment did, when it passed out of the Senate, there were 14 CPSW positions in the bill, but this committee did not buy that any of those positions were necessary. And so there was an amendment to the Senate bill that did a couple things. It addressed the what this committee, I think, perceived as an overinflated request for additional staff, and it took out all that staff. There were other concerns that had to do with concerns about whether there would be enough attorneys to represent these children. And so the other thing that the amended version ultimately did was establish a phase-in schedule, because I think there was a concern that if this law became effective on July 1, that all of a sudden there would be around 120 children who would all be entitled to counsel at the same time. And so the amendment actually included a phase-in by age of child for every 3 months. So these concerns were addressed. This committee met 3 times on this particular bill and had really lengthy discussion. Some of you are probably having PTSD about it, right? Because you were here. There was a lot of discussion. There was actually another amendment that passed and then didn't. And you all spent a lot of time. And the reason I think you spent a lot of time is, although you are I understand you are a fiscal committee or finance committee, I think that you are also impressed with the fact that New Hampshire is an outlier in this country when it comes to representation for children and youth who are in the foster care system. We guarantee counsel for kids in the juvenile justice system, CHINS, and kids who are in the delinquency system. But we are one of only 6 states in the country that never, under any circumstances, provide a right to counsel for children who are in the foster care system, who, I remind you, are in the system not because of something that they did in particular, which, lands kids in the juvenile justice system, but because their parents allegedly, or maybe were proven to have abused or neglected them. And And so that made us an outlier. And this is something that the committee seemed really committed, and the whole House and the whole Senate and our governor thought was important at the time. So that said, remembering that I'm in a finance committee, something to remember here is that there are a couple of financial factors here too. One is that, as you heard, the department has a goal to reduce its reliance on residential placement. And in doing so, if they're successful, and I really hope they are, that will reduce the number of children who are entitled to counsel, right? Because we will be referring fewer children for residential when I say residential, I'm only talking about residential treatment or congregate settings, okay? It will reduce the number of children who would then be entitled to counsel under this law, right? Because fewer kids who are at risk, fewer kids who are placed, fewer kids entitled to attorneys. The other thing is that some of these kids who have attorneys who are probably expressing their interest to not be taken out of their homes and put in an institutional kind of setting, some of them are going to win, right? And even if a few of them win, that's going to save the state hundreds of thousands, probably over $1 million or millions of dollars, because these places are not cheap. You know, they can be a few $100,000 a year for some of them. Lisa would probably know, some of them maybe more. So this does two things, right? It accomplishes a really important policy matter, and provides a voice for some of our most vulnerable kids who are looking at really, you know, you don't grow up like whatever normal means for a teenager if you are in any kind of institutional setting, if you're ripped out of your community, your school, your friends, right? So it addresses that, but it also has some potential cost savings. And the committee really, like I said, didn't see the need for all the staff that the department has requested. So.
Real good. Thank you for that refresher. Very helpful in terms of remembering how this went through. Anything to add?
Yes, please.
Sure.
The Children's Law Center provides representation to children in CHIN's delinquency and abuse and neglect cases. So I actively represent children who are placed in institutional settings and argue that they be returned to family-based settings. I am extremely skeptical of the utility, the efficacy, and the benefit to children of institutional placement. And you are right to ask for data on many different things, but that is one thing I would also seek, because we don't have outcome data in New Hampshire on the benefits to children placed in these institutions. And as one of the representatives mentioned, placement out of state we have found to be in fact harmful to children. And so these kids need counsel now. It is unfortunate that the state of New Hampshire has become so dependent on institutional placement. I think it has one of the worst records in the country for sending children out of their communities and into institutional placement. So there's a real human cost to this, right? It is not beneficial for children's psychological, emotional, developmental development. And if we set kids up for failure now, then there's a cost to New Hampshire down the line, because these are the kids who will leave institutional care without high school diplomas, without job skills, and at higher risk to be involved in the adult criminal legal system, which you all know is extremely expensive. The division has said, Ms. Noonan said that it would be court-related work that would require additional CPSW time. It is hard for me to see that. The work that the CPSWs do now they should already be doing the work of understanding why a child they should know their justification for placing a child in institutional care. And so that work should be done. The other thing about the number of hearings is that SB 417 has essentially spelled out when hearings about institutional placement can occur. And in fact, judges are not required to have hearings. If a child's lawyer files a motion asking, saying to a judge that institutional placement is not necessary in the case or won't serve the child, the judge does not have to have a hearing on that. The judge can simply review the matter. So that's RSA 169 F8-4. I encourage the committee to take a look at that. So these hearings will coincide with regular review hearings. There may be some additional hearings, that is possible. I'm not saying that it's not, but I do not see how that would require 14 additional CPSW staff, even the one per office that Ms. Noonan talked about. I think, you know, the other thing to think about, as Karen mentioned, is the cost of institutional placement. You know, we have a level system from level 2, which is very unintensive, not restrictive residential placement, up to level 5, which is the PRTF. I just pulled some dollar statistics from DCYF contracts, and for a level 2 placement, and that level 2 child should be served in the community. Their behavior can be addressed in the community. At Spalding Community Residential, it's $789 a day. That's almost $300,000 a year for a single child. Even with a federal offset of 49%, you're looking, assuming that happens, that there is an almost 50% federal offset, you're looking at $141,000 for a single child for a year. So lawyers can do two things. They can keep children out of residential placement, as Karen remarked, and then if a child is sent to residential placement, they can get them home sooner or get them stepped down into less expensive care in a family-based setting sooner.
Thank you very much for that information. Any questions for our guests? Yes, Representative Novenko.
Yeah, if I hear what you're saying, and maybe rephrase this, because I understood Ms. Noonan's presentation to say the focus was on directionally reducing the the institutional placement, which I think is consistent with what you're saying. And so what else could be done to kind of augment that effort that already exists? Everybody realizes the costs, and I would agree with the sentiment that probably has some detrimental aspects to it for a lot of different reasons, not to go into them. But what would you suggest that DCYF ought to be doing to kind of help with achieving their objectives?
Yes, well, investment in the children's system of care. And the problem is that the state is so stuck, so addicted to residential placement, and so committed to funding it. I mean, I think the DCYF presented a contract to the Executive Council in June or July of 2024 that sought approval of $365 million for a 2-year period, right? And probably some federal offset there. It's a huge price tag for around 350 kids at any point in time, maybe 400 to 500 a year. And so unless we take that money now and invest it in foster care, in ISO foster care, so therapeutic foster care, invest it in other community-based services. We support Intercept, for example, which is a youth villages services that DCYF seeks funding again for this year. We support the funding of CMEs, care management entities, which is something that 135F, the Children's System of Care, called for several years ago. But that money, you can't keep funding the obscenely high price tag of institutional care.
Yeah, I just make the comment. I mean, as I said, I'm a relatively new legislature, not new to a lot of the related issues on this. And I would say that I think we're all on the same page. It's just a question of, how do we, and I don't know whether, how to take the fact that I'm addicted to making the most cost-effective decisions on providing the best services. And so that's what I'm addicted to from the financial standpoint. And so the question is, if we're all on the same page, then all we're talking about is what's the best means of achieving the goals that satisfy the basic remit of what we're doing here in Health and Human Services, and do it in the most cost-effective way. So anyhow, thanks for your input.
Thank you.
Representative Tulersky.
I was just going to ask when we are going to be discussing the system of care and these prevention services so that we can really dig into the topic.
Excellent question. In fact, I was just pulling out my schedule. I believe that is Mr. Ripple.
So I
It's
believe
not,
The Bureau of Behavioral Health tomorrow, so it would be part of that conversation.
okay, as early as tomorrow.
Another consideration in terms of the financial investment that the state is making in residential care is, I think you heard earlier that the state is able to collect federal matching funds, Medicaid funds for facilities that they're called IMDBs, Institutions for Mental Disease. I hate that name, but anyway, that serve more than 16 children, but that's under a kind of time limited waiver that the state was able to obtain from CMS, and that is going to expire. So in terms of like the amount that the state is investing in residential treatment for children who are at these larger facilities, the federal match, at least the Medicaid match, is not going to be available. And I think the department will know exactly what the timeline is, and I think that's included in the budget and explains some of the difference in why the federal reimbursement went down, because that will not be available. But Medicaid does pay for community-based medical treatment and therapy.
Anything further from the committee? Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Anything further from those here from the public? All right. With that, then, we will start to wind down our work session at precisely 4 o'clock. A reminder, we're back here tomorrow, February 27th at 10 a.m. for a budget work session on the Division of Behavioral Health. Do watch the weather and drive carefully. Anything further from members before we close? All right. With that, we're going to close the work session, Division 3, on February 26th. Thank you all.